How's it going, everybody? It's the CDH Warrior coming at you with a new series on this channel called CDH We Survived This, Now What? So, let's roll the title. So, standard disclaimer, I'm not a medical professional. I'm working on a psychology degree, but I don't have a full degree yet. But I have a fascination with psychology and dealing with my health issues. But I am in no way a medical professional. So, now that we've got that disclaimer out of the way, I want to talk about something to start out with, which is our first episode is, what is CDH? As you saw by the title. So, general explanation, and most of this is coming out of, I work for a nonprofit, so this is our parent guide that I'm using. I was a contributor to this. Myself and several of our other board members were contributors to this guide. So it was also a couple of doctors and some other people going on. But the first question that we need to address is, what is CDH? What does it look like? So it's one... I'm sorry, I've got some notes here, but basically, CDH is what happens when CDH stands for congenital diaphragmatic hernia. So let's start off with that. And in a second, I'm going to put up in this, you're going to see, I think it's going to be to this side, is going to be a graphic. I'm going to kind of move over to the side. The graphic's going to be over here on my shoulder. But it's basically, what do different defects look like? And it's using an apple to show the defects. There's A, B, C, and D. A defect is just a little bitty hole. B defect is a rather large opening, but not a large area. Classifications are based on a Weisstellach hernia. But there's C, which is almost half the apple, about 3/8 of the apple are missing. D is basically half of the apple is gone. And I was between a C and a D. And I believe I was a Weisstellach hernia. But we're going to go over the three basic types of hernias as well. And they will come up on the screen to this side. There's posterolateral Weisstellach hernias, anterior Morgani hernias, and hiatal hernias. So let's get into a little more. We're just kind of doing an overview, so this is probably going to be about 15 minutes or so, 15, 20 minutes. But we're also going to define some terms. And we'll delve more into these terms in our next couple of episodes, just kind of explaining what's going on, what happens, so on and so forth. But it's words that you need to know. Recurrence, reherniation. It's what happens when the repair or muscle flap, it can be a synthetic patch or a muscle flap, fails. And that causes the abdominal contents to move back into the chest cavity. Another key word that you're going to hear, I actually have this, is pectus excavatum. It is what happens when our chest sinks in. So our pectus, breastbone, sinks in to the rib cage. It's lower than the normal point for the ribs. Sorry, I'm trying to figure out how to describe these things, because for somebody that doesn't have them, it's kind of weird to visualize. I'll probably have a picture of pectus excavatum over on this side. We go through a lot of things with reherniation. Basically, it means that any stomach pains, any just general pain, generally has to be looked at to ensure that it's not reherniation. We'll delve into more detail as time goes on. This is probably going to take several months to a year to go through the whole thing. There can also be heart defects, other anomalies. I was lucky that my only other anomalies, I've got some issues with my, I believe it's my brainstem. Nothing major, but just an issue. Don't quote me on what I just said. I'm delving back into my head to remember all this. I also have not so much scoliosis, but my spine goes backwards because of the pectus. So, is it really scoliosis? Yes or no? Yes and no. But that's something we can have issues with. Heart defects are common. We can end up on ECMO, which I will do a whole video on what ECMO is in the next, probably that won't be next week, but the week after. Because next week I really want to, sorry, I'm getting over allergies. Next week I want to go over a little more in depth on the lung side of things. I also want to touch on some things that I have personally been through. This is pretty much our guide. You know what? This guide is pretty much, I'm pretty much over with this guide. It's not bad, but I'm just going to sit here and talk. So, we're going to sit, and we're also going to talk about psychology. I'm not a psychologist by trade. I've been through a couple of psychology classes. I've been fascinated by psychology. But I'm not a trained psychologist. But it's one I've noticed. I'm 27. I'll be 28 in a week and a half? Not even? But, yeah. It's one... There are issues that we deal with other than this. I deal with sensory integration. I'll touch on some more things tied to CDH that aren't necessarily CDH itself. As far as some of the issues, we can deal with things in the PDD umbrella. I'll come up with PDD, NOS, and what it peripheral something disorders not otherwise specified. It's basically what we call the autism spectrum. But autism spectrum also includes things like ADHD, ADD. There's a lot of issues. I have sensory integration disorder. So this is really hilariously awkward to talk about yourself. But this is just me being honest here. Not everyone's CDH journey is going to look the same. But the reason why I brought this series up is, okay, we survived CDH. What now? That's the question we're going to try and answer through this series. What happens now? Why is it important to know what CDH is? So, to give you a little more background on CDH, it happens in about 1 in 2,500 kids globally, and it has a 50% survival rate. That's the global survival rate. I'm 1 in 4,000 because I am considered idiopathic CDH. And I'll explain. Idiopathic basically means there's no other known anomalies. It's just CDH and that's it. My only other known anomalies, I'll explain why it's labeled as idiopathic even though I have pactus excavatum and my seizure disorder. I have since grown out of that quite some time ago. Back in my early teens, I grew out of that. Don't know why. Don't know what caused them in the first place. But I will talk about that later in this series, about what went on with that. I'm also going to touch in this series about how to deal with the social aspects of CDH. Things that people don't think about. We're a fair bit physically weaker than pretty much everyone else. And I know that sounds very weird, but it's the truth. We're physically a lot weaker than other people. It doesn't mean we can't play sports. It doesn't mean we can't do what we want. It means that we are not going to physically be able to do as much as a normal kid. Can we compete equally with others? Yes, we can. But it takes a lot more work, and it's a lot harder to deal with things. So, a number of other things I want to touch on in the series are my thoughts are gone. But a number of the other things that I want to touch on this series are dealing with social interactions, dealing with making friends, being able to explain yourself, dealing with high school with CDH, which I know high school is rough for everyone, but when you live with a rare disorder, it makes things much worse. I will tell you that from firsthand experience. It makes things much worse. You get looked at differently. You get seen different. And I'm not scaring people. I'm being honest. It's not so much that nobody wants to hang out with you, it's that you will oftentimes get seen as inferior. And I don't know if that's exactly the way I want to phrase that, but this is just me being honest with everything. You end up being seen with high school, with teenagers. Everything's a competition. Who's better? Who's faster? Who's stronger? You get the picture. But for those of us with CDH, for those of us with health issues, it's much harder. We're not going to be as competitive. We're not going to be seen up at the forefront. And that can give us a bit of an inferiority complex. I'll delve into my sensory integration issues as well that probably contributed to my inferiority complex. But let's see. Because I've been going through this guide and seeing if there's more to it. But it's one. This whole first episode was really more to define things. To define some general terms, some basic information, and some just general knowledge stuff. I'm going to talk about, I do this occasionally with my cooking series on a different channel, but I'm going to touch on dealing with food allergies. I have a lactose allergy, which makes things very weird. I'll talk about my experience a couple of weeks ago where our work had an ice cream social, and I had a hard time existing with that. It's not a bad thing per se, but it's just you've got to think about what's going on. It's one, people will not always see you in exactly the same light. I know I'm trying to keep this video as positive and as lighthearted as it can be, but this is serious. These are serious issues we're talking about. These are life and death issues. Not so much the food allergies, although sometimes food allergies can be life and death. But with CDH, we're going to answer the question of, literally, we survived this? Now what do we do? Because there's no guide. There's nothing out there that tells us how to live, how to react, how to cope with this situation, especially in this modern world we live in. I mean, I've met a couple of survivors that are older than me, but they're few and far between. The survival rates are getting better, but the survival rate globally is still right at 50%, which 1 in 4,000 times 0.5 is about 1 in 8,000 survive. So, well, 50%, but your odds of running into somebody with CDH is about 1 in 8,000. Which is not great odds when you consider that fact. It's one. I'm also going to talk about some things. I'm not generally going to talk about my family outright. It's not that, oh, I don't want to talk about my family. There are some things that I want to talk about. I want to talk about work. And it's one, it's not bad about work, it's just honest. It's just brutal honesty. I'm going to talk about how to adjust to working in society in your 20s, because I'm 28. I've been through a lot, but it's one I think I've pretty much rambled on enough. We're right at 20 minutes, so we're going to have some discussions over the next several months. And sometimes I'll pull something that we discuss from our podcast, the podcast my dad and I work on, which is Mondays on Monday. And I may expand on that. But this was just an introduction of what is CDH. This patient guide still exists, I think. I had to look for it to make sure I still had my copy. But it's one I'm going to sit down and try and find some of the pictures and whatnot. Kind of explain what the organization I work for does. But that will kind of be towards the end of the video. So, for the CDH Warrior, I'm Drew Monday, and I will see you next time with another episode of CDH. We survived this. Now what? Have a great day.